Woke up quick at about noon.
Thank you for downloading, streaming, and thank you for listening here to another day of the podcast with Damien Barling, presented by Vibe Health Bar, home of the best tasting organic cold-pressed juices in the entire city. And their superfood-loaded acai bowls are something to die for as well. Check them out in Folsom, East Sac, and Oak Park. Vibe Health Bar is where busy people go to achieve vibrant health. Appreciate everybody downloading the March 10th edition of the podcast. Appreciate you streaming as well. Appreciate those who are watching over here on YouTube, our second day of the broadcast on YouTube. And a couple of hiccups there in the first day, no lie, but hopefully we've gotten past those. And I say hopefully with the utmost confidence. We'll see how it works out, though. We appreciate everybody checking us out. Hope you're enjoying that YouTube stream. If you haven't had the opportunity to go over there and check us out, please do subscribe to that channel. Just as you do the podcast, hit the alert button so you know when we go live and when a new episode post each and every single day. Amy Trask, the CBS NFL analyst, the athletic, the big three, ice cream connoisseur. She's going to be with us here coming up in just a couple of minutes. We'll talk about the NFL collective bargaining agreement. We'll talk about some of the stories that are coming out of that. There's really a lot to digest from this whole thing, and no one better to talk to than Amy Trask, who obviously spent a number of years in the front office alongside Al Davis for the Oakland and Los Angeles Raiders. Unfortunately, I guess the lead story here today is not a sports story. I mean, it has sports tie-ins, but I'm sure everybody saw yesterday the joint press release that went out between the NBA and the NHL, Major League Baseball and Major League Soccer, announcing they were closing access to locker rooms and clubhouses to all non-essential personnel in response to the coronavirus. Understandably, a lot of journalists are upset. I don't pretend to understand the dynamic of being in the locker room, but I certainly sympathize with journalists. I also sympathize with the place that these organizations, that these sports organizations, that these major league sports organizations are put in. This is unique, man. This is something that I don't know that we've experienced here in the past, and it doesn't appear, when you talk about sheer numbers, and I hesitate to say this because I don't want this to come across as insensitive. I don't think that the concern is, there's not a massive mortality rate with the coronavirus. And in fact, when you kind of dig deeper into this, it's, we're told it's very treatable. The problem is it is incredibly contagious. That's the issue that we're talking about here. I don't, and of course you sympathize with people who have passed away because of this, and you try to follow the trends so you can understand a little bit more about this virus, because it's something very new. It's something that we don't exactly know and understand about. And I'm sorry that we have to start the podcast here with this type of story. It's kind of the time that we're in. It's what's dominating headlines, across all media, including sports. And now you have organizations who have to take action, preventative action against this. And that's what we're talking about here is preventative action, with the mortality rate being, in relatively low and relative, the mortality rate is low, but the ease in which this virus is spread is extraordinary. I mean, we're talking direct hand-to-hand contact that can cause the coronavirus. We're talking close proximity that can contaminate other people. And I think that's what these organizations are concerned about. That's what these organizations are attempting to take action against. And when the NBA, I guess, leaked that memo that said, there's a possibility we could, we may have to consider playing in empty arenas, with absolutely, this is not insider information. This was just an opinion based on what was going on in California at the time, compared to the rest of the country. Obviously, many of you who live in the Sacramento area or the Northern California area, even, you probably know that the Elk Grove Unified School District is closed. That's the largest school district here in our area. There have been at least rumblings of other school districts closing. When I saw the memo from the NBA and then the Elk Grove Unified School District, I thought, man, we're one Midtown scare away. Like, we're one capital scare away from the Kings playing a game at the Golden One Center in front of nobody. I thought that memo was speaking directly to Sacramento and San Francisco. I thought that memo was speaking to Northern California. And then, as the weekend progressed, it turns out, okay, New York has some issues as well. New York, Brooklyn, and it's like, okay, I understand where Adam Silver is going with this. I understand the concern, and you try to eliminate as much as you can. You started to think, Sunday's Selection Sunday. We've got the NCAA tournament starting, and we're all going to pretend like we've been following college basketball for an entire season so we can talk about it. But one of the first stops for the NCAA tournament is the Golden One Center, and you've got people, you've got students, you've got families flying in from all over the place to be a part of that NCAA tournament. They're going to be flying here to Sacramento. You got the Final Four in Atlanta. You're going to be you've got people converging from all over the world, all over the country to be a part of that Final Four in Atlanta. And obviously, there's talks about Olympics. There's so much unknown, not only as it pertains to sporting events, but as it pertains to the coronavirus. And again, it appears, at least for younger people with stronger immune systems, it appears, and this is just based off what I read, that the mortality rate is very low. Unfortunately, the problem is you can be infected and you can contaminate someone else who may not have that strong immune system, who may not be as young as you, who may be, more susceptible to suffering, serious illnesses. And that's often true for, the flu. That's obviously true here for the coronavirus. So it's such a, I don't envy the position that these guys are in. The NBA, the NHL, Major League Baseball, Major League Soccer. I don't envy, they're navigating waters that have never been sailed before. Or at least, they're navigating waters that probably haven't been sailed within their lifetime. Or perhaps within the lifetime of their league as we know it. Major League Baseball has been around for 1 billion years. The NBA hasn't. It's a tough spot for Adam Silver to be in, which is why, when we talked about LeBron James yesterday and his remarks about, I'm not playing in front of an empty arena. I play for the fans. Like, you commend that. Like, cool. Like, LeBron's our guy. Like, he's playing for us. And, like, yeah. But LeBron should probably be a little bit more sympathetic to the position that Adam Silver is in. Because Adam Silver is in a really difficult spot. He's got to protect his players. And just as he has to protect players, I think he's hoping to protect media as well. And most important, equally as important, he's got to protect the fans. Because from the little that we know about this virus, it only takes one. You go to the Golden One Center, one person in your row is sick, and suddenly that entire row is sick. And then suddenly the row in front of them is sick, and then the row in front of them. I mean, it's the potential domino effect, again, all based off of the ease at which this disease is transmitted, I think it's what's really scaring these leagues. Part of the statement read, given the issues that can be associated with close contact in pre- and post-game settings, all team locker rooms and clubhouses will be open only to players and essential employees of teams and team facilities until further notice. Media access will be maintained in designated locations outside of the locker room in clubhouse settings. Boy, that's a man. You talk about navigating difficult waters. How about navigating difficult waters within an organization itself? Like, imagine being the Sacramento Kings, or imagine being the Brooklyn Nets or the New York Knicks or any team in the NBA or Major League Baseball. Imagine being the Los Angeles Lakers, Golden State Warriors. And you've got to designate within your team, within your company, who essential employees are. Like, how many people do you think within an organization read that statement and thought, huh, okay, I guess we're going to find out what the organization thinks. I mean, now, of course, I'm looking far too deep into this, but like, think about it. Think about the wording of that. Essential employees of teams and team facilities. And you're told, hey, you're one of the people that we've got to keep out of the locker room. Now, a lot of people have access to the locker room that don't necessarily need access to the locker room. I understand where the NBA is coming from. I understand where all of these sports organizations are coming from, man. But this is difficult. And this is just, the beginning. We're going to hear a lot about the NCAA tournament. Who knows how this thing is going to develop? Who knows how this thing is going to progress? Who knows what more developments we're going to have as it pertains to the coronavirus come, Selection Sunday. And then you get a couple of days off. And then, at that point, teams are going to start converging on the Golden One Center. We're going to learn who's going to be playing at the Golden One Center next week. And you're going to have people starting to fly in and be a part of the festivities and all of that. I mean, that event is sold out. All of the sessions, all of the days, man, the arena downtown Sacramento is going to be jumping, and it's going to be jumping with a lot of visitors. It's going to be jumping with a lot of people who are going to be getting off planes. And it's not just Sacramento that's going to be dealing with that. It's cities across the country that are going to be dealing with that. Then, of course, Atlanta, when the Final Four happens. These are difficult waters, man, and I don't envy the position that any of these guys are in. I mean, the numbers that we have right now, more than 113,000 people worldwide have tested positive for the disease. 3,900 of those people have died. Most of them have been in China. More than 62,000 people have already recovered. The virus has affected 600 people in the United States. At least 26 of those 600 have died, most of them in Washington State. Did anybody find out? I've read that a couple of times, but what I haven't read is why Washington State? Did anybody has anybody come across an explanation for that? Because if there has been one, I've missed it. 916-888-5898. I don't do enough mentioning of our text line here. You can connect with the show. Obviously, if you're watching on YouTube, there's a chat room right there for you. You could connect on Twitter at Damien Barling and Instagram at Damien Barling as well. We're going to get to Amy Trask here in just a heartbeat. Before we do, I want to remind you, if you have ever thought about experimenting with CBD, nope, CBD isn't a drug. There's no high associated with CBD, but there's a whole lot of benefit associated with CBD. Go to skynaturalcbd.com and use the promo code in the game. We here on this show have talked a lot about for a very long time the benefits of the topical balm. If you're a workout warrior or if you just wake up with aches and pains, you could use this Sky Naturals CBD topical balm. I find that it really, really helps me. It helps loosen up my neck. It helps alleviate some different issues that I have with my hamstrings and my quads, particularly after certain types of workouts. Go to skynaturalcbd.com. Use the promo code in the game. That gets you 15% off your order. Not your first order, every order. Use the promo code in the game, and that will get you 15% off your order. Again, go to skynaturalcbd.com. It's not just topical balm either. They have hemp oil extracts. They have treats for your dogs. They have melatonin mixed with CBD. They have a lot of great stuff there available on skynaturalcbd.com. Remember, use the promo code in the game to get 15% off of your order. So happy to bring in our good friend, Amy Trask. Obviously, many of you are familiar with her. She used to join us on the Lowdown very, very regularly. I communicate with her all the time on social media. She helps run the Big Three. Big Three is going to be a part of our summertime at the Golden One Center, but we'll have to visit with her at a later date and time about that. Wanted to bring Amy in, CBS Sports analyst, by the way, CBS Sports NFL analyst. She's a part of the other game pre-show, the other pregame show. We wanted to talk to her about a number of things associated with the CBA and its potential for being ratified. So we're happy to bring in Amy Trask now. Amy, we talk about this all the time here on the podcast. Do owners and players, do they work in partnership with each other?
Some yes and some no. There are 31 team owners, and I'm exempting Green Bay because they have a team representative who represents the public ownership group. But every team approaches that differently. Damien, I worked for a man, Al Davis, who from the start of my career said the following words to me exactly like this: the players are the game. And he said that to me throughout my career. And so some owners have that viewpoint, others do not. It's hard to say something collectively about all 32 teams because each one is different.
You obviously do tremendous work for CBS. You also do tremendous work for The Athletic, and you recently wrote about the CBA for The Athletic, and you wrote kind of about the pros and cons of a 17-game schedule. And there was already a report this weekend that there are some owners out there that are hoping that the players vote no so they can push forward an 18-game schedule. And I read that article and I thought, like, this feels like a negotiation tactic by the NFL owners, kind of floating this out to the media. Like, what do you like? Are we realistically looking at a time in the upcoming, years where we could be seeing 18, 19, 20 NFL games in a season?
Well, I don't look, I should never say never because that's a very, very big word. And there's things that years and years ago we were all saying never to that we're now seeing come to fruition. But I can't imagine anything greater than 18. That's not a new number that's being floated. Prior to the time I left the league, I'd heard the number 18 quite a bit. So when I heard it floated now, it didn't surprise me. Look, there are pros and cons to 17. The issue I have with what is proposed, and by the way, for that piece in The Athletic, I sort of took it as a premise that there will be 17. And if there's not, there's not. But if there will be 17, I don't like the idea of 9 home, 8 away and staggering that every year. Because as you know, Damien, that often the window, the opportunity to win is very, very, very small. And if that window is open for you in a given year, when you've got 9 on the road and only 8 at home, that puts you at a real disadvantage. So my thought is if they go with 17, and my hunch is they will, if they do that, it should be 8 and 8 and a neutral site.
Mm. How do you, like, with the addition of games, because there are teams that could very well be playing 2 extra games when you count the changed playoff format. Like, coming from the front office like you did, Amy, how do you balance, okay, there's more games, there's more revenue. Oh, yeah, but we still have this player safety issue that we're touting to the public.
Well, I would dramatically increase the number of men on the roster, the number of men on the practice squad, and the number of men that may be active on game day. So in the current proposal, there is a slight increase in roster size and a slight increase in the active day, the players who may be active on game day, and a slight increase in the practice squad. I would make far, far, far greater increases because throughout my career, I saw innumerable instances in which a player may have pressured himself, in which teammates may have pressured one of their teammates, in which coaches may have pressured someone to get back on the field who, if there were other men available, would not have had to do so. So one thing I would do is dramatically increase the number of players available to play on any given game day. And also, I would lop a few games off the preseason. At a minimum, I'd go to 3, but I might even go to 2.
Yeah, so I like the idea of increasing practice squads and available roster spots and all that, but I think when it boils down to the example of J.J. Watt or the example of any premier player at a premier position, if it's a Sunday or a Monday or a Thursday, that player is going to force themselves back there on the field no matter how many guys are available on the roster. And that's the part that concerns me. It's not the amount of availability. It's like when you're a football player that's good enough to be one of the 11 on each side of the ball, you're going to find a way to get back there on the field. And that's kind of the part that concerns me about potentially for some teams 2 extra games each year.
Well, you stated that beautifully in 2 respects. Often the pressure comes from the player himself. There are times when it comes from coaches, when it comes from other players, when it comes from the organization. But often that pressure is internal because that's what these men have done their entire careers. Get on the field, the love of the game, the love of their teammates. We may see that evolve as kids today who are more attuned to health and safety because their parents are more attuned to it, their coaches are more attuned to it. We may see an evolution in that regard as these kids grow up. But your point is well taken. If someone is going to pressure himself, I don't know how you address that if there are these extra games. The fact is they may be pressuring themselves in the existing games and query whether that extra game is going to be, the determinative point. I don't know that.
I mean, and it's naive to look at it any other way than it's a violent sport. Like whether it's 17 games or 18 games or it's 14 games or it's 10 games, like it's a violent sport with very like high impact collisions. And I don't know that the number of roster spots and the number of games played is going to particularly change that. It's just concerning when you hear so much about player safety and concussion protocol. Oh yeah, but we're going to ask you to do it a couple of more times a year.
Well, and, football's not alone in that regard. You're absolutely right. I'll start with that. Early in my career, I was standing on the sideline during practice with entertaining some of our business partners. And I made a comment about it being a contact sport. And one of our players very graciously interjected and said, "No, Aim, it's a collision sport." And he was right. But look, we're finding things out about soccer and kids who are too young to be taking headers. One thing I learned throughout the league is that a particularly vulnerable part of your skull is the exact place where kids are taking headers in soccer. So look, there are the issues, and I'm not looking to dodge them at all that you just raised with respect to football, but it's more than just football. And ultimately, the best thing we can do in so many regards is educate coaches and educate parents and educate players and make sure they understand that they're going in with their eyes wide open.
Standing on the sideline of a professional football game is the ultimate like game changer because you just you can't imagine the sound that emanates from that field until you're standing that close to it. It's really jarring.
You're absolutely right. And if I may, I'll tell you a cute, quick story in that regard. You don't understand the power, the speed, and the force of the game until you are on the sideline. And while practice is nothing like a game, when you're involved in watching a contact practice, there is also contact. And I remember one day at practice, standing on the sideline, and this was early in my career, and I just wasn't going to move. I wasn't going to flinch. I wasn't going to budge. I was just going to stand there and watch. And at one point, Tim Brown comes off the field towards the sideline, I should say, and says, "Aim, you need to back up. We know you're strong. We know you're tough. We know you don't want to move. Did you notice that everyone else has moved out of the way? Could you move back so we don't kill you?" And I just thought that was kind of a funny moment that Tim took time out of practice to say, "Could you get out of harm's way?"
Sure, it's a funny moment, but it's probably the most Amy Trask story that you could tell, that everyone else gets out of the way, but you're standing there ready to take a hit from who knows how many NFL guys out there on the field. 10 years seems insane. Why 10 years?
Well, and in the piece I wrote that you referenced, the athletic piece you referenced, I said, that's an interesting compromise and smart in many regards from my perspective to say, you know what? We're not sold on this deal. We don't love the deal. We think there's merits to some portions. We're not willing to jump in for a decade or 11 years. Why not give this a little bit of a trial and do it for a lesser period of time? And maybe the way you do that is you do it for the 10 or 11 years, but you give both team ownership and players opt-out rights. That if certain benchmarks aren't reached or certain elements don't work as believed, either side can opt out as the deal progresses, whether that's in 5 years or 6 years or 7 years. I would think building in some opt-outs makes a lot of sense.
We'll know in a couple of days. Do you think this passes?
I don't know that it will pass this week. I saw that they just extended the time from, I think it was Thursday to Saturday. I don't know that 2 extra days will really be dispositive, but it gives people more of a chance to vote. I don't know that it will pass this week, but I will, I'm going to be somewhat equivocating on that, but I will be unequivocal on this. I do not believe games will be lost. I do not believe there will be a work stoppage that interferes with the playing of any games once the current agreement expires. Sometime between now and then, I do believe there will be a new agreement.
Thanks for making time for us. The Big Three is going to be at the Golden One Center on August 1st. You've already promised to come back and talk to us about that, but thanks for fitting some time in for us to talk about
Damien,
the NFL.
I will always and forever have time for you.
I appreciate
Thanks
that.
for
And
having me on.
I'm gonna take you on a tour of all of the hot ice cream spots in Sacramento when you get here this summer.
That's a date.
Always great to talk to one of our favorites there, Amy Trask. And you heard her mention the deadline being extended. It was supposed to be voted on, and it was going to be determined whether this was going to happen or not by Thursday. It's 476 pages. I guess the extra 2 days are going to help a couple of NFL players get through it. It feels like there is increasing momentum that this thing is going to pass, which is interesting because Russell Okung, who has he's soon to be a part of the Carolina Panthers, he's accused the NFL Players Association of negotiating the proposed CBA in bad faith. He is taking the step of filing an unfair labor practice charge with the National Labor Relations Board on Monday. In the filing, Russell Okung is accusing DeMaurice Smith, who we've talked about here a lot of this show, of pushing a vote on the new CBA through to the entire group of players, despite the objections and vote of the NFLPA Executive Committee. Now, if you recall how this process works, the owners submitted their proposal. DeMaurice Smith took it, and they discussed it within the executive committee. The executive committee had to make the decision on whether they were going to send it to the players' union for a full vote, or whether or not they were going to send it back to the owners and say, we've got to get back at the negotiating table. There's too much in here that we just don't like, that we're just not a fan of. Russell Okung has been among one of the most vocal players expressing disdain about the new proposed CBA and a potential 17-game season. He also said that the NFLPA and the NFL negotiations are not representing a player's best interest in terms of health and safety. Of course, that's what we just finished talking to Amy Trask there a moment ago. And I understand Amy's point completely about, the concessions got to come from somewhere. So the concessions being, additional roster spots, which I do believe that it helps if you have an expanded roster. If we just make the numbers easy, like what is a final roster? 53. If we make it 63 or 65, but ultimately, I don't think that matters. I don't think there's an NFL player out there. Like, I don't think. What's the famous example? Was it the Macho Man, Tommy Savage? Wasn't he the one who just got like obliterated and they kind of like scooped him up? Didn't that happen to Case Keenum also? He just gets obliterated and his lineman kind of picks him up and it looks like he plays the next two possessions, on the verge of passing out. I don't think he stayed out there because it was a Jeff Fisher team. So the Rams, it's not like he was sitting out there going, well, damn it, we don't have another quarterback on the roster. It's no, they felt that was their best quarterback option. I don't think either, we talked about, Amy and I just talked about players and their desire to stay on the field. I also believe that coaches want their best players out there on the field. So, if Ezekiel Elliott, gets injured or Derrick Henry gets injured, Ezekiel Elliott and Derrick Henry, as well as the entire coaching staff, offensive and fan base of those teams, they're gonna want those two guys back out there, and they're gonna try to get their way back out there, regardless of whether there's 20 people on the roster, 53 people on the roster, or 100 people on the active roster. Like, I don't think that plays a significant role in how teams game plan and how coaches game plan. I don't think any player approaches a game on Thursday or Monday or Sunday and goes, whew, thank goodness we've got 3 more guys in the depth chart here. That's just not the way NFL players are. I don't know. That's not the way professional athletes are. I don't think that's the way most people are, at least not competitive people. So while the additional roster spots, it's like, I think it's a shallow gesture. Because I think those owners know ultimately, though, the roster spots and okay, I shouldn't say that. It's not a shallow gesture because it changes the pay scale a little bit. It changes the pay scale for those guys, who are even those, guys who might have been on the practice squad instead. suddenly they're on an NFL squad, even though they're, roster man 54, 55, 56, 57. The pay scale is still very different, and that's good for him. But ultimately what it does is, we talked about the haves and the have-nots. This puts the NFL owners in a terrific position, even though it's 10 freaking years from now. It puts the NFL owners in a terrific position to where if you expand the roster, right? We'll go back to the term that we've been using for the last week or so now, the haves and the have-nots. If you put more players on the roster, you put roster number 54, 55, 56, 57, well, guess what? Suddenly, because you already have more have-nots than you do haves. But now suddenly you add more roster spots, you have a lot more have-nots than you do haves. You have a lot more league minimum guys or close to league minimum guys than you have, big $1 million guaranteed contracts. So the next time these collective bargaining agreement issues come to the table, these votes are going to go through. I mean, there's already a belief that this proposed CBA, which it appears that the executive committee does not like. How this got pushed through to the players, especially after reading about this Russell Okung complaint, is baffling to me. Like, isn't Drew Brees on the board? Richard Sherman's on the board, isn't he? Like, how did this get pushed through? But now all of a sudden, instead of it being, I don't know, let's say for argument's sake, it's a 60-40 split, right? Let's say, 60% of the guys are making closer to the league minimum, and then you've got, the other 40% who are making, let's say, upwards of a couple $1 million in guaranteed money, okay? Well, you add, 5, 10 roster positions per team? Suddenly, what are we talking about? I'm not going to try to do math on this show, but are we talking about a 70-30 split? Are we talking about a 75-25 split? Like, I think we're regardless of what the percentage is, we're talking about greater number of players who are in the have-not category, because while it's nice to have those additional roster spots, they ain't going to be playing. And it's very rare. Like, it happens late in the season, and it does happen from time to time where teams have to juggle positions a little bit because they've suffered, a number of injuries, whether it was at the quarterback position or the cornerback position or the inside linebacker position, whatever position, they've suffered some damage to their depth chart, and they've got to juggle through to create, okay, we've got to waive this player, we've got to waive this player because we need to get in, a backup tight end or whatever. We have to bring someone in, and we've got to do it within the confines of this 53-man roster. You'll probably see a lot less of that. That actual strategy probably won't even be existent anymore. But ultimately, what does it matter? I don't think that it does. It was a very slow night in the NBA last night. Hawks beat the Hornets in double overtime, 143-38. Raptors beat the Jazz 101-92. And the Milwaukee Bucks, who hadn't lost back-to-back games in over a calendar year, lost their third straight game. The Milwaukee Bucks, who look like, at least for me, were poised to win 70 games this year, are suddenly now sitting at 12 losses already, and that opportunity seems to have gone out the door. They lost to the Denver Nuggets last night, 109-95. Of course, their last two losses were without Giannis Antetokounmpo, which kind of brings us back to a conversation that we had yesterday. Giannis Antetokounmpo, it felt like was I don't know if he was running away, but he sure had a lot of momentum to grab his second straight MVP award. And then LeBron starts the weekend by beating Giannis and the Milwaukee Bucks. Then we find out Giannis is going to have an MRI and he's going to be out for a couple of games. The Bucks go on to lose 2 games without him, and now you got to look at it like, okay, does that strengthen Giannis's case to be the MVP, or does missing games weaken his case to be the MVP? And these are all just fun conversations that we're having. I mean, I think there's 16 playoff teams. I think 15 of the teams have been decided. Maybe the exact seeding Hasn't been decided yet. But I think all we're really waiting on is to see, does Memphis hold on to the 8th spot in the Western Conference? And if they don't, who do they lose it to? Who seizes that moment and gets into the playoffs? Is it New Orleans? Is it Portland? Is it Sacramento? New Orleans and Sacramento take on each other tomorrow. By the way, we'll have a full preview of that game tomorrow on the podcast. Is it perhaps San Antonio or Phoenix or one of those teams? So we've got to, we're just trying to get through the last month of the season, right? And now with, we're a month or so away from MVP voting. And you've got to look at the weekend that LeBron James has had and start talking about, wait a minute. We talked about yesterday, did what LeBron James did and did what the Los Angeles Lakers do, if you were in the camp for Giannis Antetokounmpo being the MVP, did anything that happened this weekend change your mind? LeBron is averaging 30 points and 10 assists in his last 9 games. There's a number of stats that I came across yesterday that are really extraordinary. He's the oldest player in NBA history to average 30 and 10 over a 9-game span. He's 35 years old, remember. It's the 3rd season LeBron has had a stretch like that in his career. He did it in 2009 and 2010. He also did it in 2017 and 2018. He's the 3rd player to do that, regardless of age. The other 2 were both Los Angeles Lakers, Jerry West and Magic Johnson. LeBron is having one of his most impressive seasons. He's on track to set a career high in assists per game. He's going to lead the league in assists. 35. 17th season. 50 wins. This is the earliest that, or it matches the earliest that LeBron James has ever gotten to 50 wins. I take that back. If they beat the Nets tonight, if the Lakers beat the Nets tonight, because they're 49-13, if the Lakers beat the Nets tonight, it's the quickest that a LeBron James-led team has ever gotten to 50 wins. They're 49-13. Like, that is incredible to me. 17th year in the league. 17th year. I know what type of conversation this sparks, man, but how do you not look at LeBron James and think, man, he is the greatest player we've ever seen? And maybe these are just debates that you don't have to have. You could just appreciate, like, what LeBron is doing in year 17 is extraordinary. What LeBron is having years, a year in his 17th season that even the greatest of great players, maybe they never have. The investment that LeBron James has made into staying healthy, and the investment that LeBron James has made into his body, it's second to none. And we've got to start looking at what he's doing, man. And I know, like, I know what the passive aggressiveness, the subtweeting, the subtext. People complain that he gets too whiny with foul calls. The jumping teams. I know there are things about LeBron people don't like, but I think most of those are lame reasons to not respect how great he is. Like, you can't possibly look at LeBron. Like, is there any question now? Like, if you don't think that LeBron James is the greatest basketball player that ever lived, like, that's okay, because, like, no one's going to argue, man, you crazy for thinking Michael Jordan is the greatest. But is there a debate anymore that the conversation is LeBron and Mike? I mean, are people still trying to work in, Bill Russell and Wilt Chamberlain, or is someone going to try to work in Magic Johnson or Larry Bird or something like that? Like, are we just talking about the 2 greatest basketball players that we have ever seen are LeBron James and Michael Jordan? 17th year, what he's doing is it's just phenomenal. And again, it speaks to the investment he's made into his body. Like, it's not an accident that this dude has not suffered, a major injury. And, some injuries are freak injuries. Obviously, the trajectory of Kobe's career changed after the Achilles injury, and it was kind of one after the other after that. If enough time has passed and you could watch it without sobbing, try watching the Showtime documentary, Muse. It's phenomenal for many reasons, but it covers his Achilles injury. And then if you recall, I think he had I think it was a shoulder injury right after that. And so it was kind of injury after injury after injury for LeBron James after that for Kobe Bryant after that Achilles tear. But LeBron has been able to stay healthy. And year 17, man, that's just what I keep going back to. You look at these numbers, and I really do think LeBron has gotten to the point where he's so good that we just take it for granted. We just look at it and go, yeah, it's LeBron. We expect LeBron to be great. But this, to me, feels like a completely different level of greatness. It feels to me like something we have just never, ever seen before. As we mentioned, a really slow night in the National Basketball Association. Not so much tonight. Celtics at the Pacers. The Rockets are in action. We're all fans of the Orlando Magic tonight as they'll take on the Memphis Grizzlies. We've got the Mavericks and the Spurs. I think we'll go ahead and root for the Mavericks and Suns tonight because the Suns are taking on the Portland Trail Blazers. It'll be the Clippers and the Warriors on TNT tonight, and the Nets and the Lakers, as we just mentioned there as well. Appreciate you, as always, for tuning in and being a part of the podcast. If you haven't had the opportunity to check us out on YouTube, still trying to get a hang of this. Hopefully this video cast went a little bit smoother than yesterday's did. Want to thank Amy Trask, NFL analyst for CBS Sports, for joining us here today. Want to thank you for downloading, streaming, and for listening. Make sure you become a subscriber there on YouTube, just as you have on Apple Podcast, Google Play, Spotify, and all of our different podcast platforms. We'll be back tomorrow. We'll have a full preview of the Pelicans and the Kings. It is the biggest game of the season for the Sacramento Kings. We'll have that tomorrow here on the podcast with Damien Barling.